is your watch?
The question fell like a blade in the velvet darkness of the car, and Naomi's breath caught because Jae-Ha Shin never asked questions he didn't already know the answers to. But now, Seoul's most lethal man sat beside her in suffocating silence, his eyes fixed on her bare wrist, and what she said next would determine whether she saw sunrise, or whether someone she loved wouldn't. The watch had been impossible to ignore when Jae-Ha first placed it on her wrist 3 nights ago. Heavy. Custom. The kind of gold that didn't just gleam, it announced. In the amber-lit privacy of his penthouse, he'd fastened the clasp with surgical precision, his fingers steady, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart stumble. "This is you now," he'd said, his voice quiet, absolute. "Mine." Naomi had felt the weight of it, not just the metal, but the claim. In Jae-Ha's world, gifts weren't romantic gestures. They were declarations. Territories marked. Loyalty made visible. She'd worn it like a vow. But tonight, under the cold pulse of neon and bass that shook the walls of the Gangnam nightclub, everything shattered. Jae-Ha had been at the bar, his expression unreadable as always, when his gaze snagged on something across the room. Naomi watched his jaw tighten, watched the glass in his hand go still. She followed his line of sight, and her stomach dropped. Minho Kim. Jae-Ha's oldest friend. His right hand. His brother in everything but blood. And on Minho's wrist, catching the violet strobe lights like a beacon of betrayal, was the watch. The exact same gold. The exact same face. The impossible made flesh. Jae-Ha's eyes had found hers across the crowd then, and in that moment, Naomi understood, he hadn't asked her about the watch yet because he was deciding who to bury first. The watch had a history that Naomi didn't know about. Jae-Ha never told her where the gold came from, and she never asked. In his world, some questions were dangerous. Some answers could get you killed. But the truth was simple and brutal, the watch was made from the melted-down gold of Jae-Ha's first real enemy. His name had been Dae-Young Lee, a mid-level boss who thought he could take over Jae-Ha's territory in Itaewon. Dae-Young had been loud, flashy, the kind of man who wore too many rings and laughed too hard at his own jokes. He'd walked into meetings dripping in gold chains, gold bracelets, gold teeth that caught the light when he smiled. He wanted everyone to see his wealth. He wanted everyone to know he was untouchable. Jae-Ha had watched him quietly for months. He never interrupted when Dae-Young talked. Never argued when the older man made threats. He just sat there, still as stone, dark eyes taking in every detail, every mistake. The night Dae-Young disappeared, no one asked questions. That was the unspoken rule in Seoul's underworld, if someone vanished, you didn't look for them. You didn't say their name. You just moved on and hoped you wouldn't be next. But Jae-Ha kept something. While his men cleaned up the mess, he'd collected every piece of gold Dae-Young had been wearing. The chains. The rings. The gaudy bracelet that spelled out his name in thick letters. Jae-Ha had it all melted down in a private foundry in Gangnam, the kind of place that didn't keep records and didn't ask questions. From that gold, he'd commissioned a single watch. Custom made. Unregistered. No serial numbers, no paperwork, no trail. The craftsman who made it was paid triple his normal fee and told to forget the job the moment it was done. There was only one watch like it in the entire world. Only one. Jae-Ha wore it himself for 2 years. Every time he checked the time, he was reminded of what happened to men who underestimated him. Every tick was a warning. Every glint of gold in the light was a promise, cross me, and you become part of my collection. But then Naomi came into his life, and everything shifted. She was different from the others. She didn't fear him, but she didn't disrespect him either. She saw through the cold exterior to something underneath, something even Jae-Ha had forgotten was there. And slowly, carefully, he let her in. The night he gave her the watch, he'd taken it off his own wrist for the first time in 2 years. He'd fastened it onto hers, feeling the weight transfer from his skin to hers, and known he was giving her more than jewelry. He was giving her his protection. His name. His promise that anyone who touched her would end up just like Dae-Young, melted down and forgotten. That's why seeing it on Minho's wrist felt like a bullet to the chest. Because there was only one watch. Only one. And now it is gone. Jae-Ha had built his empire on two foundations, fear and trust. Fear kept his enemies at bay. Trust kept his inner circle intact. And for years, that circle had been small enough to count on one hand. Min-ho Kim was the shield. They'd grown up together in the same rundown neighborhood in Songdong, back when neither of them had anything but bruised knuckles and empty stomachs. Min-ho had always been the louder one, the one who smiled easily and made friends wherever he went. But when fights broke out, and they always did, Min-ho never ran. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Jae-Ha, taking hits meant for him, throwing punches to protect him. That loyalty never changed, even as they climbed from street fights to something darker, something more dangerous. When Jae-Ha started building his syndicate, Min-ho became his right hand. His enforcer. The man who handled problems before they became threats. Min-ho was the face people saw when Jae-Ha wanted to send a message. He was charming when he needed to be, brutal when the situation called for it. He knew every secret, every deal, every weakness in their organization. Jae-Ha trusted him with his life because Min-ho had already saved it a dozen times over. They were brothers. Not by blood, but by choice. By survival. And then there was Naomi. Naomi Rivers was the heart. Jae-Ha had met her at a charity event 2 years ago, one of those fancy gatherings where rich people pretended to care about poor kids while drinking expensive wine. She'd been there as a photographer, hired to capture the evening. He'd noticed her immediately, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she looked at him differently than everyone else did. Most people either feared him or wanted something from him. Naomi just looked curious. "I'm interested." Like he was a person, not a weapon. They'd started talking, and somehow, talking turned into coffee. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into late nights where she'd curl up against him on his penthouse couch, her head on his chest, her breathing slow and steady while he stared at the ceiling and wondered how he'd gotten so lucky. She made him feel human again. Like he was more than just Seoul's silent executioner. Like maybe, underneath all the violence and control, there was still something worth saving. Naomi didn't know everything about his world, he kept her separate from the worst of it, but she knew enough. She knew what he was. What he did. And she stayed anyway. That's why he'd given her the watch. Because she was his future. His escape from the endless cycle of blood and betrayal. Min-ho was his shield. Naomi was his heart. These were the only two people Jae-Ha had ever truly trusted. The only two people who could destroy him completely. And now, somehow, the watch had moved from one to the other. Jae-Ha sat in the back of his car, watching the Seoul streets blur past the tinted windows, and felt the weight of that impossibility crushing down on him. Someone had betrayed him. The only question was who. The club was called Eclipse, and it lived up to its name. Darkness punctuated by sudden bursts of light. Purple and blue neon cutting through the smoke like knives. The bass was so heavy it felt like a second heartbeat, pounding through the floor, through the walls, through Jae-Ha's chest. He didn't usually come to places like this. Too loud. Too crowded. Too many variables he couldn't control. But Min-ho had insisted they celebrate closing a major deal with a supplier from Busan, and Naomi had wanted to come along. She'd smiled when she asked, her hand warm in his, and Jae-Ha found himself saying yes before he could think better of it. Now he stood at the bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand that he hadn't touched, watching the crowd move like a single living thing. Naomi was somewhere on the dance floor with some of her friends, her laughter floating above the music. Min-ho was working the room like he always did, shaking hands, slapping backs, making everyone feel like they were his best friend. Jae-Ha preferred to observe. To watch. To notice the things other people missed. That's how he saw it. Min-ho was across the room, leaning against a table where some of their associates sat. He was laughing at something one of them said, his head thrown back, completely relaxed. His suit jacket was off, draped over the back of his chair. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. And on his left wrist, catching the violet strobe lights with every gesture, was the watch. Jae-Ha's hand tightened around his glass. The gold was unmistakable. The same color. The same weight, he could tell by the way it sat on Min-ho's wrist, heavy and solid. The same unique face with its bare design, no numbers, just clean lines and that distinctive off-center crown. It was impossible. The watch was one of a kind. He'd watched it being made. He'd worn it himself for 2 years. He'd fastened it onto Naomi's wrist just 3 nights ago. There was no duplicate. No copy. No second version. Just one watch. And it was supposed to be on Naomi. Jae-Ha's eyes cut across the dance floor, searching. He found her near the center, her dark skin glowing under the lights, her arms raised above her head as she moved to the music. She was wearing a black dress with long sleeves that came down to her wrists. He couldn't see if she was still wearing the watch. His gaze snapped back to Minho. His oldest friend. His brother. The man he'd trusted with every secret, every plan, every vulnerability. Minho lifted his drink, and the watch caught the light again. Gold against the neon. Proof of something Jae-Ha couldn't yet name but felt in his bones. The music pounded. The lights flashed. The crowd pressed in from all sides. And Jae-Ha stood perfectly still, his mind racing through possibilities, each one darker than the last. Minho turned then, as if feeling the weight of Jae-Ha's stare. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, everything stopped. Then Minho smiled and raised his glass in a toast. Jae-Ha didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't return the toast. He just watched Minho laugh with the others, watched him gesture with that hand, watched the gold flash and disappear and flash again under the pulsing lights. And in his head, 3 truths began to form. 3 possibilities. 3 different ways his world could be ending right now. Truth 1, Naomi gave Minho the watch. Maybe she'd grown tired of waiting for Jae-Ha to leave this life behind. Maybe she'd finally realized what everyone else already knew, that men like him didn't get happy endings. Maybe she'd turned to Minho, his closest friend, the one person who could understand the weight of loving someone in this world. Maybe they'd been seeing each other behind his back, and the watch was her way of choosing. Of telling Jae-Ha without words that she was done. The thought burned through him like acid. He'd given her everything. His trust. His protection. His future. And if she'd betrayed him, if she'd chosen Minho, then everything he'd built meant nothing. Truth 2, Minho stole the watch. Maybe this was a power play. Maybe Minho had finally gotten tired of standing in Jae-Ha's shadow, tired of being the shield instead of the sword. Maybe he'd taken the watch from Naomi, by force or by manipulation, to send Jae-Ha a message. To show him that nothing was untouchable. That even Jae-Ha's most precious claim could be stripped away. If Minho had stolen it, that meant war. It meant their brotherhood was a lie. It meant 20 years of loyalty had been nothing but a long game, and Minho had finally decided to make his move. Truth 3, they were working together. This was the darkest possibility. The one that made Jae-Ha's blood run cold. Maybe Naomi and Minho had been planning this from the beginning. Maybe she'd been sent to get close to him, to learn his weaknesses, to make him soft. Maybe Minho had been waiting for the right moment to strike, and that moment was now. If they were both against him, then Jae-Ha was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. He stood there at the bar, the untouched whiskey in his hand, and felt the club press in around him. The music was too loud. The lights were too bright. The crowd was too close. Everything felt wrong, like the world had tilted on its axis and he was the only one who noticed. This was a public violation. Minho wasn't hiding the watch. He was wearing it openly, proudly, in a room full of people who knew what it meant. People who would see it and understand that Jae-Ha's claim had been broken. That someone had crossed him and lived to laugh about it. It was disrespectful. It was a challenge. It was a war. And Jae-Ha couldn't do anything about it. Not here. Not now. Not without knowing which truth was real. So he stood there, silent and still, and watched his best friend smile. The car ride home felt like drowning in slow motion. Naomi sat in the passenger seat, her body angled slightly toward the window, watching the Seoul street slide past in a blur of streetlights and shadows. She'd been quiet since they left the club, but it wasn't the comfortable silence they usually shared. This was something else. Something heavy. Jae-Ha kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, but every part of him was focused on her. On the sleeve of her black dress that covered her left wrist completely. On the way she kept that arm close to her body, like she was protecting something. Or hiding it? He wanted to ask. The question sat on his tongue like a stone. Where is the watch? But asking would show his hand. It would tell her he'd seen it on Minho. It would start a conversation that might end with bodies in the Han River. So instead, he drove. And watched. And waited. Did you have fun tonight? Naomi asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, careful. Like she was testing the temperature of water before diving in. It was fine, Jae-Ha said. His voice came out flat, emotionless. He heard it and knew she would too. She turned to look at him then, and he felt her gaze on the side of his face. You seem tense. Did something happen? Everything, he thought. Everything happened. No, he said. Just tired. She nodded slowly, but didn't look convinced. Her right hand moved to her lap, fingers twisting together. Nervous. Guilty, maybe. Or just worried about him. He couldn't tell anymore, and that uncertainty was like a knife between his ribs. The car slowed for a red light, and in the sudden stillness, Jae-Ha let his eyes drop to her wrist. The sleeve was still down, the fabric covering everything from her elbow to her knuckles. He couldn't see skin, couldn't see gold, couldn't see anything. Are you cold? He asked, his voice quiet. What? She sounded surprised. Your sleeves. You have them pulled down. There was a pause. Just a heartbeat, but it felt like hours. Oh. No, I'm fine. The dress is just designed this way. It was a reasonable answer. A normal answer. But Jae-Ha had spent his entire life reading people, learning to spot the tiny cracks in their armor, and something in her voice felt wrong. Too quick. Too defensive. Or maybe he was just paranoid. Maybe he was seeing betrayal where there was none. Maybe the woman sitting beside him, the woman he'd planned to marry, was innocent, and he was about to destroy everything because he couldn't trust anyone anymore. The light turned green. Jae-Ha pressed the gas and the car moved forward, carrying them both toward whatever came next. Jae-Ha. Naomi's voice was softer now, almost fragile. Yeah. I love you. He didn't answer. Couldn't. Because if she was lying, those words were poison. And if she was telling the truth, his suspicion was already killing what they had. Either way, something was dying in this car. Naomi fell asleep quickly that night, curled on her side of the bed with her back to him. Jae-Ha lay beside her in the darkness, listening to her breathing slowly and deepening, counting the minutes until he was certain she wouldn't wake. When he finally moved, it was with the silence of a ghost. Years of creeping through rival territories had taught him how to be weightless, how to make his footsteps disappear. He slipped out of bed without disturbing the sheets and stood in the shadows of their bedroom, watching her sleep. She looked peaceful. Innocent. Her face relaxed in a way it never was during the day, like all her worries had been locked away somewhere until morning. Jae-Ha turned away and moved toward her side of the walk-in closet. The jewelry box sat on the third shelf, a black lacquered case with gold hinges that he'd bought for her last year in Tokyo. She kept all her important pieces in it, the diamond earrings from her mother, the pearl necklace he'd given her for her birthday, the jade bracelet from their trip to Hong Kong. And the watch. She was supposed to keep the watch there when she wasn't wearing it. Jae-Ha's fingers found the lid in the darkness. He didn't turn on the light. Didn't need to. He lifted the top slowly, careful not to let the hinges creak, and felt inside. Empty. His hand moved across velvet-lined compartments that should have held treasures. Nothing. He checked each section methodically, his fingers searching for any piece of jewelry, any scrap of metal or stone. All of it was gone. Jae-Ha's jaw tightened. He closed the box and stood there in the dark closet, his mind working through the implications like a chess player seeing 10 moves ahead. She'd emptied it. Taken everything. That wasn't the action of someone who'd simply lost a watch or had it stolen. That was the action of someone preparing to run. Someone gathering their valuables before disappearing. Or someone who'd already given everything away. He moved through the rest of the closet like a detective at a crime scene. Her clothes were still there, the dresses, the coats, the shoes lined up in neat rows. Nothing obvious was missing. But when he checked the small safe hidden behind a panel in the wall, the one where she kept her passport and important documents, his stomach dropped. The safe was open. Not broken into. Just open. Like she'd unlocked it and forgotten to close it again. Her passport was gone. Jae-Ha stood there, staring at the empty safe, and felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was evidence. Proof that Naomi was preparing for something. Planning something. Leaving him. Or worse. He closed the safe carefully, replaced the panel, and walked back through the closet. When he reached the bedroom, he paused at the doorway and looked at her sleeping form one more time. She shifted slightly, murmuring something he couldn't hear, and pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Jae-Ha wondered if she was dreaming about him or about Min-ho. He wondered if she was already gone. Jae-Ha didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his home office with all the lights off, watching the security feeds from Min-ho's apartment building on his laptop screen. At 3:47 a.m., Min-ho's Mercedes pulled out of the underground garage. Jae-Ha was in his own car 30 seconds later. He kept 3 vehicles back, his black sedan invisible among Seoul's late-night traffic. Min-ho drove south, away from Gangnam, away from their usual territory, toward the industrial district near the river where shipping containers stacked like building blocks and streetlights barely worked. This was neutral ground. The kind of place where people met when they didn't want to be seen. Min-ho's car turned into an abandoned warehouse complex, and Jae-Ha killed his headlights, parking 2 blocks away. He got out and moved through the shadows, his footsteps silent on the cracked pavement. The air smelled like rust and river water. Through a gap in the warehouse's metal siding, Jae-Ha could see them. Min-ho stood in the center of the empty space, lit by a single overhead light that swung slightly in the draft. And across from him, wearing expensive suits that looked out of place in the decay, were 3 men Jae-Ha recognized immediately. The Park brothers. Rivals from Incheon who'd been trying to move into Seoul territory for the past year. Jae-Ha had blocked every attempt, shut down every deal, and made it clear that Seoul belonged to him. And now his right-hand man was meeting with them in secret at 4 in the morning. Jae-Ha moved closer, pressing himself against the cold metal wall, staying in the darkness where he belonged. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see their body language. Min-ho was relaxed, gesturing as he spoke. The Park brothers were listening carefully, nodding. This wasn't a confrontation. This was a negotiation. Then Min-ho raised his left hand to check the time, and even from 20 feet away, even in the dim light, Jae-Ha saw it. The watch. The gold caught the overhead bulb and threw back a flash of light, like a signal flare. Like a beacon marking Min-ho's position in the darkness. One of the Park brothers pointed at it, said something, and Min-ho smiled. He held his wrist up higher, showing it off, and the 3 men leaned in to look closer. They were admiring it. Examining it. Recognizing it. Because everyone in Seoul's underworld knew about Jae-Ha's watch. They'd seen him wear it for 2 years. They knew what it meant. What it represented. And now they were seeing it on Min-ho's wrist, and drawing their own conclusions. The meeting lasted another 10 minutes. They shook hands, all of them, like they'd reached an agreement. Like they'd sealed a deal. Then the Park brothers left through the back exit, and Min-ho stood alone under the swinging light. He looked down at the watch one more time, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. Jae-Ha felt something inside him turn to ice. Not anger. Not even hurt. Just cold, hard certainty. Min-ho wasn't just wearing the watch. He was using it. Showing it off to Jae-Ha's enemies like proof that the shield had finally turned into a sword. Like proof that Seoul's silent king could be overthrown. Jae-Ha sent the text at noon, dinner tonight. My place. 8 p.m. Both of you. No explanation. No small talk. Just the command. Min-ho replied first, see you there, brother. Naomi's response came 10 minutes later, okay. Is everything alright? He didn't answer. By 8 o'clock, the dining table in Jae-Ha's penthouse was set for 3. White plates. Crystal glasses. Expensive wine breathing in a decanter at the center. The lights were dim just enough to create shadows, and the floor-to-ceiling windows showed Seoul glittering below like a kingdom made of stars. Min-ho arrived first, walking in like he owned the place. He always did. Hey, what's the occasion? He asked, shrugging off his jacket. Are we celebrating something? Jae-Ha stood by the window, hands in his pockets. Sit down. Something in his tone made Minho pause. The smile faded slightly, but he recovered quickly. Sure, yeah. He took his usual seat at the table, left side, facing the window. Naomi came in 5 minutes later. She wore a cream-colored sweater with long sleeves and dark jeans. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup minimal. She looked beautiful and tired and nervous all at once. Hi, she said softly, glancing between them. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was. Sit, Jae-Ha said. She sat across from Minho, her hands disappearing into her lap under the table. Jae-Ha moved to the head of the table and remained standing. For a long moment, he just looked at them. The two people he trusted most in this world. The shield and the heart. His family. I want to talk about loyalty, he said finally. Minho shifted in his chair. Okay. What about it? In my world, loyalty is everything. It's more valuable than money. More important than power. You betray loyalty, you lose everything. Jae-Ha's voice was quiet, controlled. You both know this. Naomi's eyes were wide. Jae-Ha, what's going on? He ignored the question. Instead, he moved to his chair and sat down slowly, deliberately. Then he placed both hands flat on the table in front of him, palms down, fingers spread. His wrists were bare. Empty. Everyone could see that clearly. I want you both to do the same, he said. The silence that followed was suffocating. Minho laughed, but it sounded forced. What is this, some kind of game? Put your hands on the table. Jae-Ha's eyes didn't move from Minho's face. Both of you. Now. Naomi looked confused, scared. I don't understand. Hands. On. The. Table. She lifted her hands slowly, placing them on the white tablecloth. Her sleeves rode up slightly, revealing bare wrists. No watch. No jewelry at all. Just skin. Jae-Ha's gaze shifted to Minho. Minho sat perfectly still, his hands still hidden under the table. His expression had changed. The friendly mask was cracking, showing something harder underneath. Is there a problem? Minho asked quietly. Show me your hands. Why? Because I asked you to. The two men stared at each other across the table. 20 years of brotherhood hanging in the balance. 20 years of trust about to shatter like glass. Finally, Minho smiled. It wasn't friendly anymore. He placed both hands on the table. The left wrist was bare. Jae-Ha stared at Minho's bare wrist. Then at Naomi's. Then back again. Where is it? His voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a blade. Where's what? Minho asked, but his eyes gave him away. He knew exactly what Jae-Ha was talking about. The watch. I saw you wearing it at the club. I saw you show it to the Park brothers at the warehouse this morning. Jae-Ha's hands remained flat on the table, steady. So where is it now? Naomi's face went pale. The Park brothers? Minho, what is he talking about? Minho's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked like he might deny it. Then something shifted in his expression, resignation, maybe, or relief that the game was finally over. You want the truth? Minho leaned back in his chair. Fine. Yeah, I took the watch. I took it right off Naomi's wrist while she was sleeping 2 nights ago. Replaced it with a fake one before she woke up. Minho. Naomi stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. What are you, why would you? Because I needed proof, Minho said, his eyes still on Jae-Ha. Proof that I could get close to you. That I could take something precious without you even noticing. The Parks wanted evidence before they'd work with me. So I gave it to them. Jae-Ha felt everything inside him go cold and still. You're working with them. I'm leading them. Minho's voice was hard now, all pretense gone. I'm tired of being your shadow, Jae-Ha. Tired of watching you build an empire while I stay in the background. The parks offered me my own territory. My own crew. A chance to be something more than your shield. I trusted you, Jae-Ha said quietly. And I was loyal. For 20 years, I was loyal. Minho stood up now too. But loyalty doesn't pay what it used to. And trust? He laughed bitterly. Trust is just another word for being someone's weapon. Naomi looked between them, tears streaming down her face. Jae-Ha, I swear I didn't know. I didn't give him anything. I thought, when I woke up that morning, the watch was still there. I didn't know it was fake until... Until when? Jae-Ha asked. She pulled up her sleeve with shaking hands. There, on her wrist, was a watch. It looked identical to the original, but Jae-Ha could see the tiny differences now. The gold was slightly lighter. The weight sat wrong. The craftsmanship wasn't perfect. Until yesterday, she whispered. I took it to a jeweler to get it cleaned, and he told me it was a copy. I didn't understand. I thought maybe I was going crazy. I was going to tell you tonight, I swear. Jae-Ha looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth in her eyes. She'd been innocent all along. The empty jewelry box, the missing passport, all of it had been her panicking, trying to figure out what was happening before coming to him. He'd almost killed her for nothing. His gaze shifted back to Minho. Where's my watch now? Minho smiled. Somewhere you'll never find it. Insurance policy. Jae-Ha stood slowly. You made a mistake. What's that? You should have killed me when you had the chance. Minho's smile faded.